"Could you dance with me? My ex is watching from the bar," she said, unaware he was the Mafia boss. Avery Collins was 31 years old, 4 months divorced and doing a terrible job of pretending to be fine. She was adrift in the Riptide Room, a half-fancy, half-gritty bar in the fictional port city of New Bellamy, New Jersey. It was the kind of place where office drones from the new glass towers tried to look edgy by drinking next to dock workers who actually were. Her friend had promised cheap Thursdays, which was technically true, but Avery wasn't here for the discount. She was here to forget. Specifically, to forget that her ex-husband was sitting on her entire share of the money from the sale of the small logistics company they had built together, around $38,000. It was the money she desperately needed to pay the tuition for her pivot into online psychological counseling, her escape hatch from the life that had just imploded. The bar's lighting, a sickly wash of purple and blue, swept over the faux wood tables, making everyone look bruised and aquatic. Avery stared into her cocktail. It was watery, overly sweet, and served in a glass that felt flimsy, a cheap version of the real thing, which felt entirely too appropriate for her current life. She lifted her gaze toward the main bar, scanning the crowd, and then she froze. It was him. Ethan Reed, her ex-husband, looking infuriatingly sleek in a blazer she probably paid for. His arm was draped casually over the shoulders of a much younger woman in a tight, shimmering sequin dress, the kind that looked expensive and disposable all at once. He laughed, throwing his head back, and Avery's stomach clenched. It was the exact same laugh, the same confident tilt of the head that had once made her think, "I'm safe. This man will take care of everything." A bitter montage flickered through her memory. The arguments over company shares, where he'd insisted on a structure that gave him controlling interest. The day he temporarily moved their joint savings into an account only he could access, claiming it was to avoid a tax hit. The condescending way he'd patted her hand during their last board meeting, telling the investors, "Avery has a great heart, but she just doesn't know sales. Let me handle the heavy lifting." He had handled it. All right, he'd handled her right out of her own life. Avery didn't cry. She was done with crying, but a hot, acidic burn crawled up her throat. She realized she had been staring, her knuckles white around her glass, for far too long. And then, the worst part, Ethan saw her. His eyes met hers across the room. The laughter didn't stop, but it changed. It sharpened. A slow, satisfied smirk spread across his face. It was the unmistakable look of a man who had not only won, but was enjoying the victory lap. He tilted his glass toward her in a mock toast, his expression pure, unadulterated triumph. Avery felt pinned by his gaze, humiliated and furious, trapped in the tacky blue light. "You look like someone about to do something stupid." The voice was deep, cutting through the thrum of the music with a low, gravelly texture. It was an old-school East Coast sound, rough but controlled. It came from her left. She turned. The man who spoke did not belong in the Riptide Room. He wasn't an office worker trying too hard or a dock worker letting off steam. He was sitting alone in the adjacent booth, which had been empty seconds before. He wore a perfectly tailored black suit over a dark charcoal shirt, unbuttoned at the collar. No tie. The scent rolling off him wasn't cheap beer or cologne. It was sandalwood and the faint, expensive ghost of cigar smoke. He wasn't just sitting. He was occupying the space, radiating an aura of quiet, absolute authority that made the chaos of the bar seem to bend around him. This was a man, Avery thought, that crowds automatically parted for. His eyes, dark and impossibly sharp, weren't on her. They were scanning the room. He took in Ethan, the girl in the sequin dress, and then flicked to the small, domed security camera blinking red in the corner above the bar. He saw all of it in a single, fluid motion that took less than a second. Then, his gaze settled back on Avery. He didn't smile. He just watched her, waiting. In that instant, something hot and reckless flared in Avery's chest. It was 4 months of suppressed rage, the humiliation of seeing Ethan's victorious smirk, and the sudden, defiant pulse of her own wounded pride. If Ethan wanted to see her as a defeated wreck, if he wanted a show, fine. She would give him a show, but it wouldn't be the one he was expecting. She turned her full attention to the stranger, the man who smelled like sandalwood and quiet danger. Avery looked directly at the stranger, the calculating calm in his eyes meeting her impulsive desperation. She didn't know his name. She didn't care. She only cared about the burning, proprietary gaze of her ex-husband fixed on her from across the room. "Could you dance with me? My ex is watching from the bar," she said, the words coming out stronger and clearer than she felt. She was, of course, entirely unaware he was the Mafia boss. Leonardo Grasso didn't even turn his head. His eyes flicked past her shoulder, a casual, dismissive glance toward the bar that lasted no more than a second. He recognized the target immediately. Ethan Reed, a slick, mid-level functionary at the Harbor Development Board. The HDB was a quasi-public entity that pretended to manage port logistics, but as Leonardo knew better than anyone, actually served as the primary laundry for half the illicit cash flowing through New Bellamy's shipping lanes. And Leonardo was in the quiet, methodical process of dismantling it, or rather, absorbing its useful parts into his own operations. He looked back at Avery, this woman, with her watery cocktail and expensive visible pain, was not part of the game. She was collateral damage, a civilian who had just stumbled onto a chessboard she didn't know existed, inadvertently attached to a piece he was already positioning to remove. He didn't answer her question. He simply extended his hand, palm up, across the small table that separated them. Avery stared at it. It was not the soft, manicured hand of the tech investors or marketing executives she was used to. It was a strong, capable hand. The fingers were long, and she could see a faint, textured layer of calluses across the palm and near the knuckles. This was the hand of a man who worked, but clearly not at a desk. She hesitated for only a beat. Then, driven by the sting of Ethan's stare, she placed her hand in his. The grip that closed around hers was firm, instantly possessive. It wasn't gentle, but it wasn't rough, either. It was absolute. It sent a strange jolt up her arm, a sensation she hadn't felt in years, the feeling of being completely controlled, yet, simultaneously, entirely respected. She let him pull her to her feet, her body moving on autopilot as she followed him through the tightly packed tables toward the small, pulsing dance floor. As they moved, Avery was oblivious to the subtle shift in the room's geometry. 2 men near the exit, both broad-shouldered in plain black shirts with no discernible logos, straightened up from their casual lean. One moved fluidly toward the bar, positioning himself in Ethan's line of sight. The other drifted to the edge of the dance floor, his back to the wall. They were communicating in silent glances, repositioning themselves to create a loose, invisible perimeter around Leonardo, the regular patrons, lost in the music and their own Friday Eve conversations, saw nothing. The DJ transitioned tracks, the pounding, aggressive bass softened, melting into a slow, sensual urban beat. It was the kind of music made for close contact in dark rooms. Leonardo didn't ask for permission. He simply guided her into the center of the floor, turning her to face him. He drew her closer, not into an intimate, crushing embrace, but just enough. His right hand settled firmly on the bare skin of her lower back, just above the line of her simple dress. It was a gesture of calculated, undeniable ownership, perfectly visible to anyone watching from the bar. Avery flinched at the contact. The warmth of his hand was a sudden, electric shock against her cool skin. She hadn't been touched with such confidence in a very long time. He leaned in, his lips brushing the shell of her ear as he spoke. The scent of sandalwood and expensive smoke enveloped her, a stark contrast to the bar's stale beer smell. His voice was a low vibration, meant only for her. "You want him jealous," he murmured. It wasn't a question. It was a statement of fact. "I want him to think you've switched sides." He paused, letting the implication land. "Tonight, We can help each other." Avery froze. Her entire body went rigid in his arms. It wasn't just that he'd agreed. It was the terrifying accuracy of his assessment. He hadn't just seen her desperation. He had analyzed it, understood its components, and instantly formulated a transaction. She dared a glance over Leonardo's solid shoulder. Ethan was no longer smiling. His face had darkened, his grip tightening on his new girlfriend's shoulder. He was staring at them, his jaw tight, whispering something angry to the woman, who just looked confused and increasingly annoyed. The triumphant smirk was gone, replaced by the possessive, territorial anger of a man who hates seeing his discarded property claimed by someone else. Seeing Ethan's reaction sent a sharp, satisfying jolt of power through Avery. She relaxed slightly in the stranger's hold, letting him guide her in a slow, hypnotic circle, her body beginning to move with his. "He's watching," she whispered, a little breathless from the sudden rush of adrenaline. "He sees my hand on your back," Leonardo corrected quietly, his voice neutral. "Who is he to you, really?" "My ex-husband," she said, the words tasting like ash. "We sold our company. He's holding my share. $38,000. He claims the accounts aren't settled, but he's just keeping it." Leonardo didn't react. His expression remained unreadable, but his eyes sharpened. 38,000. It was pocket change to him, but a significant sum for a man like Ethan Reed to withhold. It signaled a weakness, a desperate or greedy move. It was leverage. He filed the information away. They moved to the music. Avery acutely aware of the hard wall of muscle under his suit and the steady, calm rhythm of his breathing. He was an anchor in her chaotic, swirling mess of a life. "He's a fool," Leonardo said, his voice flat. Avery gave a short, bitter laugh. "He'd be the first to disagree with you. He'll learn." Leonardo pulled back just enough to look at her face, his gaze intense, analytical, but not unkind. "What he threw away," he said, the words landing with deliberate weight. "Someone else will pick up and polish." It wasn't a sweet platitude. It wasn't a line meant to charm her. It was a statement of value, an appraisal, and in that moment, it made her feel more seen and more beautiful than any empty compliment Ethan had ever given her. The song began to fade, the beat dissolving into ambient electronic sighs. They slowed to a stop, but he didn't release her immediately. Ethan was still watching, frozen in a silent standoff from across the room. Leonardo kept his hand firmly on her back, his other hand lifting to her face. Avery tensed, her breath catching, thinking he was going to kiss her. Instead, he leaned in, his warm breath ghosting across her skin, and paused. His lips hovered a mere inch from her temple. He didn't touch her, but from the bar, it looked like an act of profound intimacy, a quiet claim. It was a gesture of pure, calculated possession, aimed like a bullet straight at Ethan, and it hit its mark. The gesture, so simple and yet so final, snapped Ethan out of his stunned silence. The alcohol, combined with the raw humiliation of being dismissed in front of his new conquest, surged back. He stalked toward them, pushing past a waitress with a tray, his voice rising above the music's thrum. "Avery," he spat, his face flushed. "Avery, we are not done. You don't get to just walk away. We still have company business to settle." Leonardo's movement was so fluid, it was almost invisible. He didn't tense. He didn't square his shoulders. He simply pivoted on the ball of his foot, his hand still resting on Avery's back. In one effortless motion, he guided her so she was standing just behind his left shoulder, completely shielded from Ethan's view by the solid wall of his suit. It was a simple, decisive act of protection. He looked at Ethan, his expression unreadable, almost bored. "She looks done." The voice was deep, even, and utterly flat. It carried more weight than Ethan's drunken shout. "You don't get to decide that," Ethan shot back, jabbing a finger. "This is between me and my wit." He stopped, his eyes, blurry with rage, finally focused. He wasn't just looking at a man in a suit anymore. He was suddenly terribly aware of the two broad-shouldered men in identical black shirts who had materialized from the crowd, flanking them, They weren't bar security. They were perfectly still, watching him with a predatory, detached interest. Ethan's gaze dropped from the men to the hand Leonardo had resting at his side, on his ring finger. He wore a single, heavy signet ring of brushed silver. It was minimalist, modern yet ancient-looking, carved with a deeply etched, stylized G. Avery had no idea what it meant, but Ethan did. The blood drained from Ethan's face. Every dockworker, every union boss, every low-level player in New Bellamy knew that ring. It was the G mark, the sigil of the Grasso Syndicate. Ethan visibly swallowed the rest of his sentence. The bravado, the whiskey courage, the righteous indignation, it all evaporated in a single, terrifying instant. Avery, watching from the safety of Leonardo's shadow, felt a bizarre and toxic cocktail of emotions. She saw the man who had belittled her, dismissed her intelligence, and confidently stolen her money shrink. He was physically cowering. The satisfaction that flooded her was sharp, sweet, and immediate, but right behind it came a wave of bitterness. It took the silent, menacing presence of another powerful man to make her ex finally see her, finally fear consequences. Leonardo didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. His eyes drifted past Ethan, settling on the nervous-looking girl in the sequin dress, who was hovering near the bar. "You should go back to your evening," Leonardo advised, his tone dangerously mild, "before it becomes your last one here." The threat was so clean, so devoid of anger. It was paralyzing. Here didn't just mean the Riptide Room. It meant New Bellamy. It meant anywhere the port's influence could reach. A bulky security guard with a Riptide Room polo stretched tight across his chest started moving toward them, his hand on his radio, ready to de-escalate. He took 2 steps, got a clear look at Leonardo's face and the ring on his hand, and froze. He didn't just stop, he looked away. He abruptly turned and walked with sudden, urgent purpose toward a completely different and entirely empty corner of the bar. The message was clear. This bar might have a manager, but the port and everyone in its orbit had a boss. Ethan was defeated. He nodded, a jerky, pathetic movement. "Right, yeah, okay." He started to backpedal, stumbling slightly. We'll talk later, Avery," he mumbled, his voice now a desperate whisper. As he retreated, he fumbled for his phone. He tried to be sly, but his hands were shaking. He raised it, aimed it clumsily, and the screen flashed. He had taken a picture of them. Leonardo watched him do it. He made no move to stop him. As Ethan grabbed the sequined girl's arm and practically dragged her toward the exit, Leonardo turned his head just enough to look at Avery. He gave her a fractional, almost imperceptible wink. "Good," he murmured, his voice a low rumble. "Let him send it to the right people. It saves me the trouble." He placed his hand on her back again, the warmth a startling contrast to the ice in his voice, and guided her back to the booth. Her watery, half-finished cocktail was gone. In its place sat a heavy, crystal old-fashioned glass. Inside was a deep amber liquid swirling around a single, perfectly clear sphere of ice. A fresh, folded linen napkin sat beside it. "I don't let my people drink that," he said, nodding toward the new glass. He paused, as if catching himself. For tonight. The adrenaline began to drain from Avery, leaving her hands trembling. The performance was over, but the reality of what just happened was crashing in. I should go," she said, reaching for her purse. This was too much. It was out of her league, out of her world. "Wait." He reached into the inner pocket of his suit jacket. He didn't pull out a wallet. He produced a single card. It was thick. Heavy cardstock, matte black. There was no name, no logo, no company. Just a string of 10 digits embossed in silver. He pressed it into her palm. His skin was warm. "Tomorrow morning," he said, his voice dropping again, confidential and absolute. "You're going to get a call. It will be an official number. It will be the FO2. They're going to want to talk to you about Ethan's accounts, about that $38,000. Avery's stomach hollowed out. "What FO2? How do you—" "The Federal Organized Threat Unit," he clarified, answering her unspoken question. "He didn't just keep your money, Avery. He used your name and your social security number to move it through the company's closing accounts. He made you the shield. He leaned in, his dark eyes demanding her full attention. When they call, you will be polite. You will tell them you need to secure counsel. You will say nothing else. You will hang up. And then you will call this number. His finger tapped the black card in her hand. If you want to walk through this fire without getting burned alive with him, you call me. Avery stared at the card, the silver numbers seeming to glow in the dim purple light. It all clicked into place, the security guard's retreat, Ethan's sudden, abject terror. She hadn't just asked a handsome stranger to dance. She had stumbled into the arms of the very thing Ethan, and apparently the entire New Bellamy waterfront, was terrified of. The following morning, the glamour and adrenaline of the Riptide Room felt like a fever dream. Avery was back in her cramped rental apartment in Dockside Heights, a faded building that smelled of salt air and mildew. The reality of her life crashed down on her with the pale morning light. She sat at her small kitchen table, a stack of envelopes in front of her, the rent for this place, which was already past due, the tuition bill for the online certification program, her one hope for a future, and the latest, most terrifying bill from the Bellamy Regional Care Center, where her mother was staying after her last fall. The numbers swam in front of her eyes, a tidal wave of debt pulling her under, and the $38,000 that could have solved it all was sitting in Ethan's pocket. She was running the numbers for the fourth time, trying to find a combination that worked, when her phone buzzed on the table. It was an unknown number with a Washington, D.C. area code. She almost let it go to voicemail, but a knot of anxiety made her pick up. "Hello? Is this Miss Avery Collins?" The voice was brisk, official, and cold. "Yes, this is she. Miss Collins, this is Agent Harris with the Federal Organized Threat Unit. We need you to come to our Mid-Atlantic field office at 1000 hours this morning to provide a statement regarding several financial irregularities." The blood drained from Avery's face. "I'm sorry. A statement about what I don't understand. Your name and social security number have appeared on a series of virtual transfer records linked to an ongoing investigation into the New Bellamy Harbor Development Board. 10 o'clock. Miss Collins, this is not optional." The line clicked dead. 2 hours later, Avery was sitting in a windowless, gray room inside the imposing FO2 Mid-Atlantic building, a glass and concrete monolith that loomed over the older part of the city. 2 agents, a man and a woman who looked exhausted and angry, sat across from her. "So, Miss Collins," the male agent began, "can you explain why a payment of $38,000, your exact share from the sale of your former company, was received into your account, and then, less than 60 seconds later, transferred to an unverified electronic wallet with no registered owner?" Avery's heart stopped. That's my money. My ex-husband, Ethan Reed. He was holding it. He told me the accounts weren't settled." "He told you," the female agent repeated, her voice dripping with skepticism. "So you're saying you had no knowledge that your social security number was used to authorize this transfer?" "No, none. I've been trying to get that money from him for months." "That's convenient," the male agent said, leaning forward, "because right now, your name is the only one on this particular paper trail. A trail that leads directly into the same slush fund we're investigating in connection with the Harbor Development Board. The board is all over the local news. Miss Collins, this is not a parking ticket." He slid a file across the table. "Unless you can provide concrete proof that you were an unwitting party, you are currently an accessory to felony money laundering. You are tied to this investigation, and it is not going to be pleasant." When she finally walked out of the building, Avery was numb. The city noise seemed distant, her vision tunneling. She felt utterly, completely alone. Framed for a crime she didn't commit with money that was stolen from her, the legal system wasn't just failing to help her, it was actively preparing to prosecute her. She reached the bottom of the concrete steps and stopped, blinking in the harsh midday sun. A black armored SUV, the kind that looked like it belonged to a diplomat or a dictator, was idling at the curb. The tinted rear window lowered with a silent, electric hum. Leonardo Grasso was looking at her. He wasn't surprised. He wasn't concerned. He looked like a man who had been waiting for a train that had just arrived precisely on time. "Get in, Avery." She didn't even have the energy to hesitate. She opened the heavy door and slid onto the plush leather seat. The door closed with a heavy, final thunk, sealing them in a world of absolute silence. The SUV pulled smoothly into traffic. They were not polite, Leonardo stated, his eyes on her face. "They think I did it," she whispered, her voice cracking. They said my name is on the transfers, that Ethan used you." Leonardo cut in, his voice calm and brutal. "He didn't just keep your money, he washed it. He ran it through your accounts to create a firewall between him and the real transaction. He made you the cutout. The FOTU knows this. They don't really want you. They want to squeeze the weak link. And right now, you are the weak link. They will press on you until you break or give them something bigger." He turned his full body toward her in the spacious back seat. "I can fix this." Avery looked at him, at the perfect suit, the cold, capable eyes, the sheer, immovable confidence. He knew they would call. He knew exactly when she would be out. He knew, in detail, what Ethan had done. "I can have my lawyers intervene," he continued. "I can provide the FOTU with an alternate, much more interesting paper trail to follow, one that makes your file disappear from their desk and land in a case-closed drawer. I can pull you out of this file, permanently." Avery felt a dangerous, terrifying sliver of hope. In exchange, he agreed. "You tell me everything you know about Ethan Reed, not the ex-husband, the man at the Harbor Development Board, his habits, his friends, his schedule, who he has lunch with, who he drinks with, what his vices are. You become my consultant on the subject of Ethan Reed." She stared out the tinted window. This was the choice. On one side was the gray, uncaring monolith of the FOTU, a legal system that saw her as a pawn to be sacrificed. On the other was this man, who operated in a world of shadows, signet rings and armored cars. Cooperating with him meant stepping into that darkness. It meant becoming part of his world, whatever that was. She thought of her mother, of the kind nurses at the care center, and the impersonal, threatening red ink on the bottom of the bill sitting on her kitchen table. The legal system wouldn't protect her. It had already failed. She turned back to Leonardo, her spine straightening. "I'll do it, but I have one condition. I'm listening. My mother, my family, whatever this is, whatever you do, they are not to be touched. They are not to be hurt or threatened or even inconvenienced. You don't go near them, ever." Leonardo nodded once, a sharp, immediate gesture. There was no hesitation, no negotiation. His gaze was absolute. "Family is the one thing that is off limits," he said, his voice dropping, taking on a conviction that was almost religious. "It's the only line that no one, not me, not my enemies, gets to cross. It is the entire reason I do this job." He held her gaze, sealing the bargain. "You have my word, Avery. They will never be touched." Leonardo didn't arrange their meeting in his office. Instead, he took her to the Lantern House. It wasn't a restaurant Avery had ever heard of, and she realized why as their car passed through 2 sets of private security gates. It was a discreet, glass-walled structure cantilevered over the dark, churning waters of the new Bellamy Inlet, offering a panoramic view of the distant, glittering container port. The dining room was nearly empty, designed for privacy, with tables spaced so far apart that conversations were islands in the quiet. The meeting was framed as a debriefing, a chance for her to fulfill her side of the bargain. But Avery couldn't ignore the details. They didn't just know Leonardo's name. He greeted him with a deference that bordered on fear. Her chair was held for her. Her water glass was never empty. It was a performance of soft power, designed to show her exactly how he operated, how he treated the women he chose to be with. "Tell me about Ethan at the board," he said, after the waiter had placed her appetizer, a delicate arrangement of scallops, in front of her. Avery, calmed by the quiet professionalism of the place, found it easy to talk. She didn't gossip, she reported, "He's desperate to be seen as a big shot," she explained, picking at her food. "He loves to show off. He always uses the Harbor Development Board's corporate card to buy expensive rounds of whiskey at whatever bar he's at. He thinks it makes him look powerful." Leonardo nodded, his eyes fixed on her. "What else?" "He brags. A lot. Especially about new contracts. He kept mentioning something called the Atlantic Trade Commission, how he was the key negotiator for their new import routes." Leonardo's posture didn't change, but his eyes sharpened. The Atlantic Trade Commission was a legitimate, if bureaucratic, agency. But the routes they controlled were the same ones his organization had been carefully trying to secure. And where does he do this bragging? "He has a routine," Avery said, a bitter taste in her mouth. "Friday nights, always at the Crow's Nest. It's where the junior board members go to feel important. He'd be there by 9, holding court, buying drinks on the company tab." Leonardo processed this. The information was a map. Ethan wasn't just a petty thief skimming from his ex-wife. He was a security leak, a vain, sloppy man who was broadcasting sensitive port business in a public bar. And if Ethan was leaking information, he might not just be bragging, he might be selling. This pointed directly at Leonardo's main rivals for the port, a violent, ascending group from Latin America known as the Marquez Circle. They were always looking for an inside man. Their main courses arrived, as if on cue. A phone, separate from the one he used for casual calls, vibrated in his jacket. He glanced at the screen, and his entire demeanor shifted. The relaxed, attentive dinner companion was gone, replaced by the man from the armored SUV. "Excuse me," he said, but it wasn't a request. He stood and walked to the glass wall overlooking the bay. Avery watched as he answered. The conversation was low, but the language was not English. It was a rapid, harsh burst of what sounded like Russian, followed by an equally fluid, sharp series of sentences in Spanish. He was gesturing with his free hand, chopping the air, giving orders. It was terrifying. And, Avery admitted to herself, compelling. He was a master of a world she couldn't even begin to comprehend. He ended the call, slipped the phone back into his pocket, and the mask of the calm restaurateur slid back into place. He returned to the table and sat. "I apologize for that," he said, resuming his meal as if nothing had happened. "When this world calls, I have to listen." Before she could respond, he reached into his jacket again and produced a small, nondescript black phone. It was a burner, simple and functional. He slid it across the table. "This is for you. My number is the only one programmed in it. There are also 2 contacts, Kane and Mira." He tapped the phone. "They are my right and left hands. If the FOD comes back, if an agent you don't recognize tries to speak to you, you call Kane. If anyone follows you, if a car seems to be behind you for more than 2 blocks, if someone so much as looks at you the wrong way, you call Mira." Avery stared at the device. It was a tangible link to the violence she had just heard in his voice. "You're doing all this because I'm useful to you," she said, her voice flat. "Because I know about Ethan." Leonardo met her gaze. He didn't deny it. "It started that way," he said, his honesty more disarming than any lie would have been. "When I saw you in that bar, you were a tool I could use against Reed. Now." He paused, considering. "Now it's 50-50. The rest of the dinner was quiet. When they left, the sky had opened up. A cold, driving November rain hammered the pavement, turning the parking lot into a black, reflective mirror. Their driver was waiting with the SUV, but there was still the short dash from the awning to the car door. As Avery braced herself to run, Leonardo stopped her. He shrugged off his heavy, impossibly expensive wool overcoat. Before she could protest, he draped it over her, the scent of him sandalwood, wool, and the faint, cold smell of the night air enveloping her. The coat was huge, weighting her down with its quality and its warmth. But he didn't just drop it on her. He pulled the collar up around her face, and his arm came around her, his hand resting on her neck to hold the coat in place against the wind. His fingers were warm against her skin. They were no longer at a polite, businesslike distance. She was tucked under his arm, flush against his side, shielded by his body and his coat. She could feel the solid muscle of his chest, the steady rhythm of his breathing. Her heart hammered, and for the first time that night, it had nothing to do with fear and everything to do with the man beside her. They reached the SUV, and the driver held the door. Leonardo didn't let go of her. He leaned down, his mouth close to her ear, his voice a low vibration against her skin, easily heard over the drumming rain. "Am I taking you home tonight?" he asked. "Or would you like me to come up?" It was the question, not a demand, not an assumption. He was giving her the choice, respecting a boundary that Ethan had never even acknowledged. Avery, who had slept alone and afraid for so many months, who was aching from the cold and the loneliness, made her decision. She looked up at him, her face half hidden by his coat. "Up," she said, her voice small but firm. "But don't bring the war with you." A slow, fractional smile touched the corner of Leonardo's mouth. He guided her into the warm, silent sanctuary of the vehicle. "I have rooms," he said, as the door sealed them inside, "where the war can't get in." Leonardo's penthouse was not her apartment. It was a sprawling space on the top floor of the Pier 7 residences, a stark new building that loomed over the industrial container port. The entire western wall was floor-to-ceiling glass, offering a breathtaking, brutalist view of the massive cranes and the endless, dark water. But inside, the war felt distant. The space was not the cold, sterile lair of a villain. It was warm, masculine, and intensely controlled. The floors were dark, polished wood. The furniture was low and upholstered in rich leather and gray cashmere, and the air was filled with the same faint scent of sandalwood she'd first noticed in the bar. Soft. Golden light glowed from hidden fixtures, making the room feel like a sanctuary against the storm. And the storm was loud. The rain, driven by the wind off the bay, hammered against the glass, a constant drumming percussion that insulated them from the city below. Avery stood dripping on the imported rug, still clutching his heavy coat. Her own thin dress was plastered to her skin. Leonardo didn't stare. He simply moved to a closet built seamlessly into a wooden wall, emerging a moment later with a thick, impossibly soft white button-down shirt. "This will be warmer," he said, holding it out. He didn't suggest she go to the bathroom to change. He simply turned his back, walking toward the kitchen to pour 2 glasses of water, affording her a privacy that was both respectful and deeply intimate. Avery quickly shed her cold, wet dress and pulled the shirt on. It fell to her mid-thigh, the sleeves covering her hands entirely. It smelled of him. When he turned back, she was standing there, small and enveloped in his shirt. He looked at her, and his eyes, so sharp and analytical before, softened. He moved toward her slowly, giving her every opportunity to retreat. He stopped just in front of her, his gaze locked on hers, ensuring every fractional movement was invited. He raised his hand, not to grab, but to gently touch her face, his thumb brushing a damp strand of hair from her cheek. "You're cold," he stated quietly. He placed his hands on her waist, his grip firm but not tight, and drew her closer. Avery's hands came up to rest on his chest, against the fine wool of his suit. She could feel the solid muscle beneath, the steady beat of his heart. He lowered his head, not for a kiss, but to rest his forehead against hers. They stood like that for a long moment, breathing the same air, the sound of the rain filling the silence. His breath was warm, ghosting across her lips. When he finally kissed her, it was impossibly gentle. It was a question, a test, a seeking of permission. Avery, who had only known the selfish, demanding kisses of her ex-husband for so long, felt something in her chest unlock. She leaned into him, her fingers curling into his suit jacket, and answered. The kiss changed. The gentleness gave way to a sudden, deep hunger. It was no longer a question, but an answer. It was a consuming, desperate heat that spoke of loneliness and a sudden, sharp recognition. It was the kiss of a man who controlled everything but had finally found something he didn't want to control, only to possess. With an arm securely around her back, he lifted her as if she weighed nothing. Avery's breath hitched, her legs wrapping around his waist by instinct. He carried her the few steps to the kitchen island and set her down on the cool, smooth stone surface, pressing into the space between her knees. She shivered, partly from the cold of the stone, partly from him. His hand immediately went to her back, stroking up and down her spine through the soft cotton, a gesture of pure reassurance. "It's okay," he murmured against her mouth, before kissing her again, deeper this time. Avery felt utterly, completely seen. He wasn't pouncing on her, he was unraveling her. His hands were reverent, his touch deliberate. He kissed the line of her jaw, the pulse in her throat. "You are beautiful," he said, his voice a low vibration against her skin. He paused, his lips tracing the small, faded scar on her chin, a mark she had always tried to hide with makeup. "This," he kissed it, "and you are brave. You stayed, even after you knew." Clothing was discarded, but Avery barely registered the process. It was a series of sensations, not actions. The slide of rain-damp fabric giving way to warm skin, the cool air of the room followed by the immediate, radiating heat of his hands and his mouth. There was no fumbling, no awkwardness, just a slow, deliberate exploration that left her aching. He moved them from the kitchen, guiding her to the long, deep sofa that faced the window. Outside, the container port's lights blurred into constellations in the rain. When they finally moved together, it was as rhythmic and powerful as the storm outside. It was a collision of control and surrender. Leonardo never closed his eyes. He cupped her jaw, his gaze fixed on her, needing to see every flicker of emotion on her face. He wanted to witness her, to brand the moment into his memory. His eyes, usually so hard, were dark with a combination of raw, animal possession and something underneath that was overwhelmingly, shockingly tender. Afterward, as the world slowly resolved back into the sound of the rain and the dim golden light, he didn't roll away, he didn't speak. He simply pulled a heavy cashmere blanket from the back of the sofa and cocooned them both in it. He settled her against him, her head finding the natural hollow of his shoulder, her body draped over his chest. His hand, the one with the silver signet ring, came up to her shoulder, his thumb drawing slow, lazy circles on her skin. His heart beat beneath her ear, a deep, steady, reliable thrum, like the engine of a great ship idling in the harbor. Avery, wrapped in his warmth, his scent, and his undeniable strength, felt a profound, bone-deep sense of safety. For the first time in months, perhaps years, the knot of anxiety in her stomach was gone. She was lying in the arms of a man who could kill, a man who commanded a world of violence she had only glimpsed, but tonight, he was just holding her, and for the first time since her divorce. Avery Collins fell asleep without the fear of nightmares. She was long asleep when Leonardo's burner phone, left on the coffee table, lit up the dark room. He didn't move his arm from under her, but his eyes opened, instantly alert. It was a text from Kane. "Marquez has received the photo of Ethan with the girl." Leonardo's jaw hardened, just slightly. He read the message once more. He had expected this. He had, in fact, counted on it. But seeing the confirmation, while Avery slept in his arms, stirred a cold, protective anger. He reached over with his free hand and silenced the screen, plunging the room back into darkness. The war was knocking, but he had told her he had rooms where it could not get in. Tonight. This was one of them. He let the message wait. Tonight, he would let her sleep. The next afternoon, Avery went to visit her mother at the Bellamy Regional Care Center. She was bracing herself for the inevitable, awkward conversation about the overdue bill. But when she got to the reception desk, the woman smiled brightly. "Oh, Miss Collins, we were so happy we could move your mother. The new room in the South Wing just opened up." Avery was confused. "Move her? I didn't request a move. I can't afford—" "Oh, no, dear, there's no charge," the receptionist said, tapping her computer. "It's all been covered. The Bellamy Harbor Benevolent Association took care of the outstanding balance and sponsored her upgrade to a private room. They do such wonderful work for port families." Avery's breath caught. She had lived in New Bellamy her entire life and had never heard of the Bellamy Harbor Benevolent Association. She knew exactly who it was. It was Leonardo, It was a gesture of absolute, silent power, a message that his protection extended beyond her and into the foundations of her life. Later that day, as she was processing this, her personal phone rang. It was the same Washington, D.C. number from the FOTA. Her stomach clenched, but she answered. "Agent Harris," she said, her voice steady. "Miss Collins." The agent's voice was completely different. The skeptical, aggressive edge was gone, replaced by a tone that was almost polite. "Yes. Thank you for taking my call. I just wanted to inform you that your file is currently under review. We've received substantial clarifying documents from an alternative source that shed new light on your situation. It appears your involvement was, as you stated, non-consensual. We may not require a further statement from you at this time." He was backpedaling. Leonardo had done it. He hadn't just provided a distraction, he had pushed something into the federal system so powerful it made them apologize. Just as she was hanging up, a text message came through. It was from a number she didn't recognize, but the preview on the screen said it all. It was Ethan. "Avery, we need to talk. Please. I didn't know you were with Grasso. You don't understand who he is. He's not just some businessman. You're in danger." She stared at the message, at the pathetic, transparent fear. The man who had called her naive, who had stolen from her, was now trying to warn her. A month ago, this text would have sent her into a panic. Today, she felt nothing but a cold, distant pity. She held her thumb over the message and calmly deleted the entire thread. That afternoon, Leonardo insisted on taking her to lunch, not to a discreet, private room, but to the Harborline Bistro at 1 o'clock, the busiest time of day. The bistro was the unofficial cafeteria for New Bellamy's elite Port Authority executives, shipping magnates and city council members. When they walked in, the restaurant Mawar, which had been buzzing with loud conversations, fell into a hush. Every eye in the place turned to them, to Leonardo Grasso, the man who owned the shadows, walking in during broad daylight, and to Avery, the unknown woman on his arm, the woman he seated himself, his hand resting on the back of her chair in a clear, public display. It was not a date. It was an announcement. It was his way of telling the entire city, "She is mine. She is protected. She is off limits." During the meal, his burner phone vibrated on the table. He glanced at the screen, his expression hardening almost imperceptibly. It was a message from Kane. "What is it?" Avery asked, her voice low. Leonardo finished his sip of water and placed the glass down. "Our consultant just made a very stupid move. Kane just confirmed it. Ethan used a proxy to sell a package of sensitive port logistics data to the Marquez Circle. He sold data to your rivals. He was desperate," Leonardo said, his voice flat, analytical. "He needed money to disappear. He just bought a one-way ticket to a very short life. But in doing so, he's put you in the middle." He leaned forward, his voice dropping. "Here is the new problem. If the FOTU catches him, and they will, they are building a separate case against him. Now they will use everything they have. That includes your old, closed file. They'll reopen it to pressure him. Your name gets dragged back in. If the Marquez Circle gets to him first, they will find out he was laundering your money, and they will see the picture he took of us. They will assume you are my partner, that you know my business. They will come for you to get to me." Avery felt a chill. "So what happens?" "The situation must be contained," Leonardo said simply. "He can't be allowed to run to the feds, and he can't be allowed to be taken by Marquez. The cleanest way to end this, for both of us, is to get him in the middle. Let him come to me. I need to talk to him." Avery looked at him, truly seeing the cold certainty in his eyes. "Talk to him," she repeated. She finally understood. Talking in Leonardo's world was not about coffee or negotiation. It was about an ending. This realization should have terrified her. But as she sat there, she was also acutely aware of the power that now surrounded her. The hospital bill for her mother was paid in full. The federal agents were apologizing to her. A black SUV with a driver named Sal now waited for her downstairs whenever she had to go anywhere. He was teaching her his rules, in small, Practical ways. That night, back at the penthouse, he found her in the kitchen, scrolling through her online course materials. He came up behind her, kissing the side of her neck. "What is this? My dream, I guess," she said, leaning back against his chest. "An online counseling platform. I want to aim it at the dock workers, the port families, the ones who deal with trauma, with stress, who can't talk about it." He was quiet for a moment, reading the screen over her shoulder. Then he nodded. "Good, do it. It's not that simple. Leo, it takes money. Servers, security. You build the part, you know," he said, his voice a low rumble in her ear. "I'll handle the rest." He kissed her again, and she turned in his arms, the domestic simplicity of the moment a strange, warm blanket over the cold reality of their lunch conversation. Before he let her go, he pressed a small, laminated card into her hand. It had a long alphanumeric string on it. "My security," he said, his tone shifting back to business. "You do not walk on the port grounds alone, ever. You carry the phone I gave you, charged at all times. And you do not accept any package from anyone unless Mira texts you a code that matches this one exactly." "Understood." Avery looked at the card, then back at his face. Understood. She was in his world, and while she was terrified of the cold, she was becoming addicted to the warmth. The call came during lunch. Ethan had not shown up for his shift at the logistics firm, the one Leonardo had arranged. He had not called in, simply vanished, his status updated to an indefinite sick leave. It was Kane, Leonardo's internal security head, who reached out to Avery directly, his voice tight with an urgency that bypassed pleasantries. "Have you had any contact with Ethan Reed, Avery?" Sitting in her new office overlooking the harbor, felt a chill that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. "No, not in weeks." "Why?" "He's off the grid," Fodu replied, which Avery now understood was the organization's term for running. "He cleaned out his apartment. He was running." The realization hit her hard. Ethan, weak and compromised, was now also desperate. The confirmation came less than an hour later. Leonardo was in his own office when his encrypted tablet chimed. A short video file from the Marquez Circle network. The footage was grainy, sourced from a dock camera. Ethan, he was standing in the cavernous, derelict space of a warehouse on Pier 14, a part of the port Leonardo usually left to the smaller players. Ethan looked pale, strung out, talking to someone off camera. His voice was thin but manic. "Tell Grasso I have the peace he values. Tell him I know what he did." He tapped his temple. "I have the leverage." Leonardo did not hesitate. He did not slam his fist. His stillness was more terrifying. He made one call. "Mira, Maple Glen, now." He was at Avery's office in 3 minutes. "We are leaving." "What, Leonardo?" "I have a meeting at 4. He took her arm, his grip firm but not bruising, pulling her toward the private elevator. "Your meeting is canceled. Ethan's made his move." They bypassed the usual armored sedan. A different, nondescript SUV was waiting. As they sped away from the harbor, heading inland, he explained, "He's on Pier 14. He says he has leverage. That means you. He's bluffing. He's a coward." "He's a coward, yes, which makes him predictable," Leonardo said, his eyes scanning the traffic. "But he is also desperate, which makes him dangerous. He thinks he can trade you for a clean exit." They drove for 20 minutes, deep into the suburbs, to a town called Maple Glen. The safe house was the opposite of Leonardo's penthouse. It was a sprawling, single-story home, painted a muted beige, complete with a manicured lawn and a literal white picket fence. It was the picture of suburban anonymity. As they walked inside, the heavy, soundproof door thudding shut. Avery's frustration boiled over. She spun on him. "Why am I hiding? Why am I the one locked away because of his mistake? I am tired of running from him." Her pride, the same resilience that had kept her going for years, bristled at the idea of being collateral damage. She wanted to face the man who had ruined her past. Leonardo stepped close, his voice dropping to a low growl that vibrated through her. "You are hiding because, for the first time, he is not just trying to hurt you. He's not just trying to get money. He's trying to get to me." He tapped his own chest. He thinks you are my weakness, and I will not allow him to test that theory." The tension held for a beat, then dissipated, leaving an unsettling quiet. The safe house was sterile, yet comfortable. This night was nothing like their first explosive encounter at the penthouse. There was no storm raging outside, only the quiet hum of high-end security systems. They found pasta in the pantry and cooked, the movement strangely domestic. They ate on the sofa, watching some mindless television show, their shoulders touching. Later, lying in the unfamiliar bed, Leonardo reached for her hand, lacing his fingers through hers. It was the gesture of a real couple, an island of normalcy in a sea of threat. But Avery could see the calculation in his eyes. He was present, but part of his mind was elsewhere, running variables, mapping out defenses. He broke the silence, his thumb brushing over her knuckles. "I always assumed my life would end in one of two ways," he said, his voice soft, directed at the ceiling. "A bullet from a rival, or a knife from someone I trusted." He turned his head, his dark eyes finding hers in the dim light. "I never anticipated the greatest danger would be vulnerability. Exposing someone else to the light because they were standing next to me." He tightened his grip. "I do not like seeing you in anyone else's crosshairs, Avery. It is a complication I find unacceptable." Avery felt a profound shift inside her. This was the man who had held her against the glass, claiming the city's skyline as his own. And this was also the leader, the capo, whose quiet words could command loyalty or death, whose mind was currently weighing the lives of his men against the threat to one woman. She saw the burden he carried, the isolation of his power, and the genuine fear not for himself but for her. The duality of him, the protector and the predator, did not frighten her. It made her love for him deepen, settling into something solid and unshakable. The peace shattered at 2:13 in the morning. It was not a loud siren, but a series of sharp, digital chimes from a panel in the hallway, coupled with a vibration from Leonardo's phone. He was out of the bed before the second chime, pulling on his pants, his earpiece already in. "Mira, talk to me," he commanded, moving to the monitor. Avery sat up, her heart pounding. The monitor showed the front gate, illuminated in stark infrared. A single, dark sedan was parked just outside the fence. Mira's voice was tinny in the earpiece, but Leonardo repeated her words for Avery. "Unregistered vehicle. Outside the gate. Heat signatures. Just one. The driver." "Is it one of yours, a scout?" Avery whispered. Leonardo's face hardened into a mask of cold fury. "No, it is not them. It is him." "How?" Avery felt breathless. "How did he find this place? This place is supposed to be clean." Leonardo stared at the screen, and then a look of dawning, cold realization crossed his features. He looked toward the garage. "Your old car. The tracker." It was the one loose end. The car she had driven here, the one she had owned before him, was still registered to her. They had not yet replaced it. Ethan, in his desperate scramble, must have accessed her old accounts, found the GPS service for the car, and followed it. He was desperate enough, or stupid enough, to walk directly into Grosso territory. "He's not coming in," Leonardo said, his voice devoid of emotion. "He's waiting. He wants me to come out. He wants to bargain." "Call your men," Avery said. "Have them." "No." Leonardo checked the handgun he had retrieved from the nightstand safe. He was not calling for a sniper. He was not calling for a perimeter team. This was not business. He turned to her, his eyes locking onto hers, intense and final. "I'm going to end your history with him tonight, Avery." He tucked the weapon into the back of his waistband. "After that, there is only you and me." Leonardo was not going to permit this confrontation in the quiet, sterile anonymity of the suburbs. It was too clean, too visible. He made one call. Kane, his most efficient head of security, intercepted Ethan's sedan less than 10 minutes after he had arrived outside the safe house gate. There was no struggle. Ethan, who had clearly been expecting a negotiation, found only professional silence, a taser, and a black hood. The next time Avery saw Ethan, it was nearly 3 in the morning. Leonardo had driven them back to the harbor, to the dark, sprawling expanse of the new Bellamy container port. A light, miserable drizzle was falling, making the ground slick and reflecting the sickly yellow glare of the high-pressure lights mounted on towering poles. The air smelled of salt, rust, and diesel. Ethan was bound to a steel chair in the middle of a wide clearing, dwarfed by mountain-like stacks of red and blue containers. Leonardo had brought Avery. He had been clear about it in the car, his voice low and devoid of compromise. "This is not for bait," he said, his eyes on the wet road. "This is for closure. I will not have you looking over your shoulder for the rest of your life, wondering what happened to the ghost." Ethan looked pathetic. His expensive suit was wrinkled and damp, his face pale with a mixture of sweat and rain. But when he saw Avery, his eyes were still filled with that familiar, desperate cunning. Avery. Thank God. He scrambled, trying to shift in the chair, the zip ties holding his hands behind him, straining. "You have to listen to me. You have to tell him. It was Marquez, the Marquez Circle. They approached me. They said they would get me out of the state, a new identity. Everything. All I had to do was deliver you. They just want to talk to Grasso. Use you to get him to back off the southern shipping routes. It was just a conversation." Leonardo stood beside Avery, a silent, imposing shadow just outside the main circle of light. He did not speak. He just watched, his stillness more unnerving than any threat. He gave Avery the floor with a slight, almost imperceptible tilt of his head. Avery stepped forward, into the light. She was surprised by the steadiness of her own voice. The fear she had lived with for so long was gone, replaced by a cold, clear finality. "You never paid the settlement, Ethan. Not because you could not, but because you thought I would always need you. You thought I would eventually crawl back, broken and poor." She looked at him, really looked at the man she had once thought she knew, the man who had shared her bed for 5 years. "Now you are about to die, so suddenly you remember my name." Ethan's eyes darted past her, focusing frantically on the man in the shadows. He tried to laugh, but it came out as a strangled, wet choke. "Him. You are trusting him, Avery. He is going to do things to you so much worse than a bad divorce. This is the Mafia. They do not just break hearts, they break bodies. He will own you." Leonardo finally moved, stepping fully into the light. The rain slicked his black hair to his head. He was not loud. He did not have to be. "If I was the kind of man you describe, Mr. Rowe, you would already be beneath the water. Your opinion is irrelevant." He paused, his gaze fixed on Ethan. "I'm letting her choose your fate." He turned to Avery. His gaze was absolute, cutting through the rain. He was genuinely handing her the power, the scales of justice and revenge. "There are 2 ways this ends. I can give him to Fotu. They have been alerted to a wanted fugitive hiding at this pier. They will take him. He will be processed, and he will disappear into the federal system for a very long time. Or—" Leonardo's voice dropped, the sound barely carrying over the drizzle. "I can do this my way. He vanishes tonight. No paperwork. No trial." This was the test. It was the first time he had ever placed his law below her morality. Avery looked at Ethan, at the man who represented 5 years of shared dinners, arguments over bills, and the ultimate, selfish betrayal. Then she looked at Leonardo, a man she had known for less than 2 weeks. A man who had seen her at her lowest, who had never lied to her, and who was, at this very moment, willing to stain his own hands to protect her, or keep them clean to respect her. She made her choice. "Give him to Fotu," she said, her voice firm, unwavering. "I want my record clean. I want this link to my old life legally severed." She looked directly at Leonardo, her meaning clear. "And I do not want you to get your hands dirty because of my past." Leonardo held her gaze for a long, heavy second, then gave a single, sharp nod. He signaled to Mira, who had been waiting in the darkness. Ethan started to babble, protesting, pleading. "Avery, no, please!" But Mira and another guard hauled him up and dragged him toward a waiting, unmarked car. The distant wail of sirens was already approaching Fotu, arriving happily to claim a high-value fugitive that had fallen right into their laps. It should have been over. It was not. Marquez Circle was not willing to lose their pawn so easily. The roar of engines preceded the headlights. Two heavy-duty pickup trucks burst from between the container stacks, tires screeching on the wet pavement, muzzles flashed from the passenger windows. A spray of bullets hammered the steel container where Leonardo and Avery stood, the sound like violent popcorn. "Down!" Leonardo shouted. Reacting with an inhuman speed, he shoved Avery hard, pushing her behind the solid metal bulk of a large shipping container, shielding her body with his own as he drew his weapon in the same fluid motion. He did not panic fire. He leaned out, took careful aim, and fired 3 controlled shots. One of the truck's headlights exploded. The truck swerved, crashing hard into a stack of wooden pallets. The second truck opened up again, concentrating its fire on their position. The air was filled with the deafening, sharp cracks of gunfire and the high-pitched scream of ricochets. Leonardo kept Avery pinned against the cold, corrugated steel. His arm locked across her waist, he put his mouth right next to her ear, his voice a low, commanding rumble beneath the chaos. "Breathe, Avery. Keep breathing. Look at me." He forced her chin up. "Do not look at the blood." He pointed toward a narrow gap between the containers that led to the dark docks. "That is the exit. Wait for my signal." But his backup was already moving. Dark figures, Leonardo's men, emerged from the shadows, flanking the trucks from 2 sides. The firefight was intense but brutally short. Within 30 seconds, the only sounds were the rain, the approaching sirens of Fotu, and the groans of a wounded man. Leonardo's team secured the area. One of the Marquez shooters was alive, already being disarmed and zip-tied for interrogation. The rain was heavier now, washing the dark patches on the pavement clean, as if the violence had never happened. Leonardo did not release her. He turned her around, his hands coming up to cup her face, his palms rough and warm against her cold, rain-soaked skin. His eyes were wild, still burning with adrenaline. He checked her from head to toe, his gaze frantic, looking for any scratch. "This," he said, his voice raw, breathless. "This is the worst part of my world. This is the truth of it." He held her face tighter, forcing her to see the reality, to smell the cordite in the air. "If you stay with me, Avery, there will be more nights like this. There will be guns and blood, and waiting by the window, hoping I am the one who walks back through the door." Avery's heart was hammering against her ribs, a frantic, painful rhythm of pure terror and, confusingly, exhilaration. She was terrified, but she had never felt more alive. She looked at the man holding her, the man who had just saved her life while offering her an exit. "I do not want a life of just studio apartments and unpaid bills." "Leonardo," she replied, her voice shaking but resolute, "I do not want to be safe and alone." She reached up, placing her trembling hands over his. "I choose the life that has you in it." 1 month passed. The city and the harbor settled back into their usual rhythm. The shootout at the container port was buried, dismissed as a minor territorial dispute between small-time crews, but the real victory was quiet. Appearing on page A12 of the local newspaper, the Fotu Mid-Atlantic Division announced a major bust, rolling up the money laundering operation that had been running through the harbor board. Avery scanned the article over coffee in Leonardo's penthouse. Her eyes found the name. Ethan Reed, listed as a cooperating witness. He had traded his knowledge of the Marquez Circle's financial movements for protection. He was gone, absorbed into the federal system, a ghost who would never haunt her again. Leonardo, true to his word, had handled the rest. The legal mess that Ethan had left her in was quietly untangled by Grasso's lawyers. The judgment against her was vacated. The $38,000, frozen in escrow, was released back to her. It felt strange to see that money, the sum that had once represented her entire ruin, now looking so small. She did not use it for a new car or a new wardrobe. Instead, she invested it, leasing a small server space and hiring a web developer. She was launching an online consulting platform, a resource hub for the families of the port workers, the wives, partners, and laborers who needed help navigating benefits, legal aid, and career transitions. She knew that world now, and she knew she could help. The ripple effects of her new life spread. Her mother was moved out of the substandard assisted living facility and into a bright, private apartment with a view of a garden. She adored Leonardo. She stopped calling him Mr. Grasso and insisted on that nice portmaster, a title that always made Leonardo smile. He visited every Sunday, never arriving empty-handed, always bringing a bouquet of flowers and her favorite lemon cake. The relationship between Avery and Leonardo shifted. The frantic, desperate intensity of those first 2 weeks had settled. Like a raging fire banking into deep, steady burning coals, the passion was still there, a constant hum beneath the surface, but it was now supported by a structure of stability. Avery still kept her small apartment near the harbor. She liked the independence of it, the feeling of a space that was entirely hers. But now, she had a key to the penthouse, and in her apartment, a sleek, modern desk had been installed by the window, a place where Leonardo often worked late, the two of them existing in comfortable silence, the two most powerful forces in the city operating out of a one-bedroom flat. Their worlds had not consumed each other. They had interlocked, creating something stronger than either one alone. On a Tuesday night, exactly 2 months after they had first met, Leonardo picked her up. He did not tell her where they were going. He just led her down the familiar streets, the salt spray of the harbor misting their faces, until they stood outside the Riptide Room. It was dark. A closed for private event sign hung on the door. "What is this?" she asked. "A memory," he replied. Pushing the door open, the bar was empty, the chairs were stacked, the tables bare, but it was not completely dark. Just as she remembered from that first night, a single, deep blue light cut across the wooden dance floor, illuminating the swirling dust motes like tiny stars. The low thrum of a quiet jazz melody played softly from the speakers. Leonardo walked her to the edge of the floor. He turned to her, his dark eyes soft in the blue light. He offered his hand, his palm open. "This time," he said, his voice a low rumble, "there is no ex watching from the bar. There is no one here at all. But I have to ask, do you still want to dance with me?" Avery felt a smile spread across her face, slow and genuine. The first time, she had danced out of desperation. This time, she would dance out of desire. She placed her hand in his. "I want to dance. For me. With you." He drew her close. This was not the nervous, hesitant embrace of their first encounter. This was possession. This was belonging. His arm wrapped around her waist, pulling her flush against him, her head resting naturally in the hollow of his shoulder. They moved slowly to the music, two shadows in a sea of blue. The distant sound of a foghorn from the harbor drifted in, a reminder of the world he commanded, the world that was now hers. He leaned down, his lips brushing the shell of her ear as they swayed. "I finished the dirty part. Avery, the paperwork is filed. The ghosts are buried." He pulled back just enough to look her in the eyes. "The beautiful part, the rest of it, that is all yours." Avery felt her chest tighten, not with fear, but with a profound, overwhelming sense of peace. This man, who lived in a world of violence and shadows, had consistently offered her light. He had never seen her as broken, only as strong. "I love you, Leonardo Grasso," she whispered. The words felt new and powerful on her tongue. It was the first time she had said them, truly meant them, since her marriage had crumbled. "And it is not because you saved me from Ethan. It is not because you gave me my money back or cleaned my name." She reached up, her hand tracing the line of his jaw. "I love you because you had the power to destroy him, but you let me decide how it ended. You respected my closure." Leonardo stopped moving. He searched her face, seeing the absolute sincerity in her eyes. He lowered his head and kissed her. It was not the desperate, claiming kiss from the penthouse, or the adrenaline-fueled kiss from the docks. This kiss was a promise. It was slow, deep, and devastatingly thorough. It sealed the past and opened the future, a silent vow made in the middle of an empty dance floor. When he finally broke the kiss, he rested his forehead against hers. "I will always let you decide, Avery," he vowed, his voice thick with emotion. "You will choose the house. You will choose the future." He paused, a small, possessive smile touching his lips. "I will let you decide everything except about leaving me. That is not negotiable." Across the room, hidden in the shadows by the bar, Kane and Mira watched their boss. Kane nudged Mira. "He is gone," Kane muttered, shaking his head with a reluctant smile. Mira just watched, a rare softness in her eyes as Leonardo dipped Avery in the blue light, the sound of Avery's laughter echoing in the empty room. The capo, the untouchable, the man who never let anyone inside the perimeter, had finally allowed one woman to breach the wall. The story had started here, in this bar, with a desperate request. It ended in the same bar, with a committed promise. All the knots, the betrayal, the money, the Fotu investigation, the rival crews had been untied. Avery had stepped toward the most dangerous man in the city to escape her ex, but tonight she stepped into his arms, not as a victim but as his equal, and this time she walked into the danger with her eyes wide open. Thank you so much for listening to this story. We would love to know where you are tuning in from tonight, so please drop a comment below and share your thoughts. Do not forget to subscribe to Mafia Boss Stories. Give this video a like, and if you really enjoyed it, hit that hype button to help this story reach even more people.